How can any company knowingly manufacture a product that poisons its users? How can any attorney defend a company that would do such a thing? And how can any society tolerate it? But we do. There is no conscience in Washington, which has been bought and paid for. Conscience has to come from you. If real regulation is to happen, it has to come from you.
Hi, my name is Pam Killeen, and welcome to my other podcast, Truth Over Spin, where I like to give a voice to people whose voices are often unheard. On my other podcast, Circadian Reboot, I get into more detail on many health issues. Today, I'm thrilled to announce on the show I have an old and dear friend of mine, Dr. Paul Connett. Dr. Connett is a retired professor of environmental chemistry and toxicology, internationally recognized for his work in environmental health and advocacy. He holds a PhD in chemistry from Dartmouth College and has spent decades researching and educating the public on the health and environmental risks associated with fluoride exposure. As the co-founder and executive director of the Fluoride Action Network, Dr. Connett has been at the forefront of global efforts to end water fluoridation, citing scientific evidence on its potential harm to human health, including its effects on brain function, thyroid health, and bone integrity. Throughout his career, Dr. Connett has delivered presentations in over 50 countries, engaging with scientists, policymakers, and community groups to raise awareness about fluoride toxicity. He is co-author of the book The Case Against Fluoride, published in 2010, a book that compiles decades of research demonstrating the risks of fluoridation policies. His work has contributed to policy changes worldwide as many cities and countries reconsider the practice of adding fluoride to public water supplies. Dr. Connett's dedication to public health and scientific integrity continues through his leadership at the Fluoride Action Network, where he collaborates with researchers and activists to challenge outdated fluoridation policies and advocate for safer water practices. Welcome, Dr. Paul Connett. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been a while since we've seen each other. You were heavily involved in trying to get fluoride out of our city water here in London, Ontario, many, many years ago. And I know you've been traveling around the world and educating people about the toxicity surrounding fluoride and the important reasons why we need to stop adding this toxic chemical to our water supply. Now, I'd like to start off with some good news for everybody, because this has been a very frustrating battle for those of us who've been trying to educate our city councillors. But I'd like to start off with some good news from you about some of the recent goings on in the area of this artificial water fluoridation issue.
Well, certainly, there's a lot of good news. A lot of good news. I've forgotten just when we last spoke, Pam, but two major developments from our end is that in 2016, we did two things. One, we asked the National Toxicology Program of the United States, the NTP, which does reviews of toxicology for all the federal agencies in the US government, so a major body, to review the neurotoxicity of fluoride, whether or not fluoride damages the brain, damages brain development, lowers IQ in children, something that I have personally been following since 1996, when the first IQ studies came out of China. So that was one important thing. The other important thing was that under the Toxic Substances and Control Act, TSCA, we petitioned the EPA to ban the deliberate addition of fluoride to the drinking water, which is a policy approved by the EPA. We petitioned them in 2016. They rejected our petition on scientific grounds, which allowed us to go to federal court and say we want this adjudicated at the federal level. And they agreed to do that. So this was wonderful. We had a level playing field at last. We had a federal law judge, two level playing fields. We had a federal law judge who's going to look at the science of the EPA and look at our science saying that fluoride lowers IQ and make a judgment. And the judgment from the judge could not be influenced by the status of the EPA. He was only going to rule on who has got the best science. Well, both of these things took 7 years. It took 7 years before the National Toxicology Program came back and said, you're right, fluoride lowers IQ. Fluoride is a neurotoxic hazard, and based upon over 70 studies, it looks as if the threshold for its effect is about 1.5 parts per million. That number is important because in Canada and the United States, we fluoridate the water at 0.7. So the dentists say, oh, well, you've got a margin of safety of 2. You don't have to worry. Well, of course you have to worry, because the horrible thing about fluoridation is you can't control the dose that goes to each person, and people have different sensitivities. So when you've got a situation where toxicity has been demonstrated at a certain level, when you then say, well, what level is safe to give to the whole population, you have to choose a level at least 10 times lower than the level which causes harm. So that would mean you wouldn't want to fluoridate anybody above 0.15 parts per million. Total victory, because we fluoridated 0.7. So that's 3 or 4 times higher than you would allow. Okay, so that's the science, the best science from an independent government agency. Okay. Then we go to the lawsuit. The lawsuit also took 7 years, and it was done in 2 stages. We were able to produce toxicologists who had done the important IQ studies. More about those IQ studies later. But they appeared, there were 2 major studies, one from Mexico City and one from Canada. And the experts on those studies testified in our case. The first part of the trial took place in June of 2020. And the judge ruled, essentially, fluoride is clearly a hazard, a neurotoxic hazard, but as far as the level at which it can cause harm, that was still an open question. And he actually rejected the EPA's response, which was in the first part of the trial. Oh, they used pro-government, pro-industry experts to say you haven't proved cause and effect. And the judge says, you don't have to prove cause and effect. And when it's a matter of public health, you just have to establish what the risk is. You have to deal with risk. But he said, I would like to wait until this National Toxicology Program review has been finalized, and then I'll make my final judgment. Well, run the clock forward to 2023, I think it was, or was it 24? 24, only 24. In February 24, we had the second and final part of our trial, and in September of 2024, the judge ruled in our favor in an 80-page, which is brilliant. If you have any doubts about what we're saying, read that 80-page review by a federal law judge who was very bright and had obviously had enormous integrity, because he knew what he was doing, that if you ruled against them, all hell would break loose, which has subsequently happened, part of your victories. So he ruled in our favor. He essentially ruled what we had to prove, that we had to prove 3 things. We had to prove that fluoride was a neurotoxic hazard. We did that in part 1. 2, we had to prove that it was a hazard at the levels at which water fluoridation exposes people to. And thirdly, we had to prove that it was an unreasonable risk. And he concluded that based upon all the evidence he heard, the NTP review and the scientists firsthand said fluoridation poses an unreasonable risk to the developing brain of America's children. And that was September 24. That was a huge victory in federal.
And what are the
lawsuit.
repercussions of this judicial decision? Are people actually listening? I mean, we've just seen Utah stop fluoridation. Is there a ripple effect going on right now?
Oh, there's rumbling all over the place. Obviously, individual communities have stopped fluoridation. I've forgotten, I lost track of the number, at least.
I've heard dozens of communities are pulling it out of their water supply.
It's somewhere between 50 and 100 communities. But most importantly, as you've mentioned, the whole state of Utah has voted overwhelmingly to stop fluoridation, banned fluoridation in Utah, the first state to do that. But also in Florida, I think this was the biggest victory. The sweetest words I've ever heard was from the Surgeon General of Florida, a tall, very impressive man who's got a PhD and an MD from Harvard. And he said, I've read these IQ studies and I am appalled by this practice of putting fluoride into the drinking. Absolutely appalled. And as based upon the science of these studies, fluoridation amounts to malpractice. To continue fluoridation is medical malpractice. And he's saying this at a press conference, the Surgeon General of Fluoride. And by his side, he has Ashley Malin, the Canadian researcher who did important work on thyroid function and fluoride and some other work, very important work. She made an impressive statement, and also a dentist. So the three of them had this major press conference, and I'm sure your listeners can get it on the internet. If they sleuth around, they should be able to find it. I forgot to say Ludovo, Ludovo, something like that. But the Surgeon General of Fluoride.
Now, what you're saying is, of course, sacrilege to those who believe that fluoride is good for our teeth. I mean, maybe people don't know. For those who still think that fluoride is good for them, maybe you can go to the backstory and talk about how and why this practice began in the first place and what the fluoride actually consists of.
Yes, 1945 is when it essentially started. In the 30s and 40s, dentists had tracked down the cause of dental fluorosis, which is a mottling of the enamel, discoloration of the enamel, and certain places had this in Texas, Colorado, and so on. And eventually tracked it down, I think in the 1930s, and said this dental fluorosis was caused by fluoride. But those same dentists, when they looked at these cases of dental fluorosis, it's strange, the teeth look awful, but they don't seem to have much tooth decay. And at this point, dentists in the U.S. Public Health Service said, well, maybe there's a level of fluoride we can add to the water, which lowers tooth decay, but doesn't cause too much dental fluorosis. And the so-called optimal level that they came up with was 1 part per million. So in 1945, that's when they started experiments in the United States, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and also in Canada, in I've forgotten which towns now, but
Brantford, yeah,
Brantford, and these studies were very badly designed. But after 4 or 5 years, they said, "Oh, yes, it's working. The tooth decay is coming down dramatically." Because there are all kinds of things they didn't control for. It's bad studies. But anyway, by 1950, before any of these studies had actually been completed in Canada or the United States, or they had done health studies to see if there are any short-term, long-term health effects in children, in elderly people. No. In 1950, with practically no science on the table, this practice was endorsed by the U.S. Public Health Service. And you see, if you look at the history, and it's all covered in my book, The Case Against Fluoride, but if you look at the history, you see this transition from the U.S. Public Health Service investigating this issue within a few years of declaring that this is a beneficial public health and we should do it throughout the United States. Then they go into promotion mode. They switch from investigation, research, to outright promotion. And that's when you go from science to propaganda. And unfortunately, since the 1950s, this has all been a propaganda war. Facilitated.
I know that when you do a lot of debates, which are not really debates, with communities and their public health officials, they just cite propaganda. They don't actually come up with any research to validate their decision to continue the fluoridation process. And yet the average consumer isn't necessarily aware of what's really going on. The research behind fluoridation is very weak.
It is extremely weak on both fronts. They say it's safe and effective, and the only people opposed to it are crazy lunatics. Okay, that's their mantra, and this mantra's been going on for about 8 decades. They are right. Fluoridation is completely safe, and it's very, very effective. And as I said, the only people opposed to it are crazy people. That's been their mantra, and they've stuck to it. And, Pam, they're still doing exactly the same thing. And they've had a little bonus thrown their way, because one of the people that's looked at our court case, watched the video, because it was during COVID, the first part, so it was on Zoom, was Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy looked at that lawsuit and, with his own background knowledge, declared that fluoridation was a bad thing. And if he ever got to be the head of the DHHS, he would try to stop it. Anyway, but what this has done is to allow the propagandists on the other side to latch on, as Kennedy is now the what do you call it? The
champion
band leader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Instead of looking at the science, those studies, which I could talk about, the IQ studies, which were financed by the National Institute of Environmental Health Studies. So we're talking about excellent, first-class studies where all the co-founders were controlled for, where it was all based upon individual measurement of the fluoride levels in pregnant women's urine. That's the measure. And the effect, looking at the IQ of children, the offspring of these women. And what they found is, as the level of the fluoride in the mother's urine goes up in the population, the IQ of the offspring goes down. That was done in Mexico City in 2017 by largely Canadian researchers. And then in 2019, the result was essentially duplicated in Canada by Green and others, Canadian researchers from Christine Till's research group at York University. They essentially replicated this, except with one slight difference. Whereas in the Mexico City, this was true of both male and female babies' lowered IQ as a function of mother's fluoride exposure measured in their urine. In the Canadian case, it was the boys who had their IQ lowered and not the girls, as far as mother's urine levels were concerned. But the Green research team did two other measurements of fluoride exposure for the pregnant women, both calculating their actual fluoride exposure and also looking at the levels of exposure in water. And in both those second two measurements, they found an association for both boys and girls. So these are the studies. As I said, they're funded by US government. They cost millions of dollars. They took quite a number of years. They controlled for everything. Leading researchers like Bruce Lanphier, Howard Hu, Christine Till, and others. These are leading researchers. They've done the same work with other neurotoxins like mercury and lead. So they know what they are doing. And so this notion that you could dismiss all the IQ studies, which they've been telling me since 1996. You don't have to worry about these Chinese studies. It's China. They're no good. They didn't control for everything. Their levels are much, much higher than here and so on. Nonsense. The levels in most of the Chinese studies were lower than 4 parts per million, which is the so-called safe drinking water standard in the United States. So that ain't safe, is it, based upon these Chinese IQ studies? But they controlled for everything. And whereas the Chinese studies were comparing villages, the average level of fluoride in this village is X, the average level in this village is Y, Y is higher than X in this lower IQ. Higher the fluoride level in the village, the lower the IQ. That was the Chinese studies, dozens of them. Now there's over 70 from around the world. But what they
didn't these findings also lead to the recommendations for mothers who are bottle feeding their babies to not use city water?
Well, actually, that recommendation by the ADA, and they quickly hid it when they saw the political ramifications, was based upon dental fluorosis. They said that the level of dental fluorosis, if you fluoridate, would be very, very little, unnoticeable. But the number of kids with dental fluorosis in the United States has gone up and up and up and up with fluoridation. So that's when they said, with mother's milk, we advise you not to, parents should not, if you're going to bottle feed their babies, make sure you use non-fluoridated tap water. And of course, that advice now is even more important today, because we're not just talking about mottling of the teeth, we're talking about lowering your children's intelligence, lowering their ability to function in the world. And you know, one of the ironies of all of this is that the liberal mind that wants to help poor people has always promoted fluoridation on the basis you fluoridate to help fight tooth decay in low-income families. And there's no question, Pam, that tooth decay is a function of poverty. And that's what we should be fighting. Poverty, right? Fight poverty, you'll get less tooth decay. But if you're going to fluoridate the drinking water because you are worried about the welfare of low-income children, the last thing you want to do is a measure which lowers their potential, lowers their intellectual potential, lowers their ability to get the best job. That's a terrible thing to do to families of low income. So let's get rid of that crap once and for all.
And how are they going to afford to buy bottled water if it's lower income families?
Oh yeah, well, exactly. And then we've actually had some efforts to try to get filters into low-income families and so on. And we know how difficult it is for low-income families to avoid fluoridated water. And let's give you a very simple, practical thing. A lot of low-income people don't have cars, and therefore they can't carry from the supermarket all the bottles of water that you need if you're going to use bottled water. And secondly, they can't afford the reverse osmosis equipment to remove the fluoride. So unfortunately, low-income families are trapped with fluoridated water. It's a pernicious thing for low-income
Now, didn't
families.
the CDC say that it doesn't really even work when you drink it internally, that it works perhaps a little bit topically? This is an admission from the CDC themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. The CDC that's promoted fluoridation is the number one propaganda arm for the promotion of fluoridation in the United States. Health Canada is the equivalent. They are a propaganda arm for this thing. But yes, they said, I think it was in 1999, we used to think that the baby needed to get water, fluoride, as early as possible during pregnancy. That's why we recommended to dentists to give fluoride tablets to pregnant women. Now, based upon what we know now, that was a disaster to give fluoride tablets to pregnant women. But that's what they felt. But then they said, but now it's clear that the main benefits, the primary benefits of that's the word they use, the predominant benefits of fluoride are topical. It works on the surface of the tooth. It works on the tooth after it has erupted into the oral cavity. It doesn't work essentially before the teeth have erupted. So, you know, to me, that's when fluoridation should have stopped. They should have said, well, fluoride may have some use topically, therefore we should provide free toothpaste, toothbrushes, etc. for all the families, but especially low income. Change the delivery mode. But no, they didn't want to do that. They never wanted to admit that they've made this huge mistake. I would say this is the biggest mistake that's ever been made in public health, is to force fluoridated water on our children, on our infants, and on our fetuses.
It's so corrosive, even to our pipes. Like for people who have lead pipes, it corrodes the pipes. It's going to increase the lead in the water as well, which is also a neurotoxin.
Yeah, and there was one point when we were thinking about this IQ, that the method that fluoride lowered IQ was just what you're talking about, that it helps to leach out lead. Well, that may contribute to it, but it's now clear that it's the direct impact on fluoride on the developing brain. The fluoride, not the lead. In fact, if you look at today, more IQ points are being lost today from people drinking fluoridated water than people being exposed to lead, because large sources of lead have been phased out, lead in paint, lead in gasoline, and so on. So the number one cause of loss of IQ today, compared to everything, is fluoridated drinking water. That's how massive a mistake this has been, and how in Canada in particular, you need to review how public health education is financed and supported. Because the big villain in this case, as far as I'm concerned, is the medical officers of health. Every community, big city in Canada has a medical officer of health, and they're paid a lot of money, and the council rely on these medical officers of health to tell them what's safe and what's not safe, what they should do to protect health and whatnot. And these medical officers of health, like robots, and I'm not exaggerating here, these medical officers of health, like robots, have been to community after community after community in Canada telling people that fluoridation was safe and effective, even while we were providing the science which was indicating that that was not true. So they're part of the arm. The other half of the arm is the top of this public health bureaucracy, Health Canada. Health Canada has supported this practice. I'm trying to get the right word. Unprofessionally and unethically, in my view.
Isn't it illegal? It's illegal what they're doing. I mean, they're saying this is a water additive, and yet they're promoting it as a treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. You should. The person you should have on your program, if you haven't, is Gilles Perron from Quebec. He and his friends have got fluoridation out of Quebec, and they look at the rest of Canada and are just absolutely mind-boggled that you are continuing this thing. But it comes back to Health Canada, because every time this practice has been challenged in Canada, every time communities stop fluoridation, like Waterloo in Ontario, every time that happens, what Health Canada has done has gone out and found some pro-fluoridation dentists and academics working for government, and they've come back with a rubber stamp report which said there is no health effects from fluoridation. It doesn't damage the bones, it doesn't damage the brains, and these experts say so. And 5 of the 6 experts they used in one report, I think it was 2009, I've lost track of the dates, 5 of them were known to be pro-fluoridation. One was the big promoter of fluoridation in the United States. It's worth just a moment looking at how outrageous these people are, how biased they are.
Listen, Paul, remember when you were here in London and we had that public participation meeting, and there was a dentist on stage giving his 5-minute presentation, and he was showing all these rotting teeth from these children, and you leaned over to me and you said, Pam, those are children who live in a fluoridated community. I mean, here's a dentist from our dental school trying to basically smokescreen the whole situation. He's a hypocrite.
Yeah, well, basically what they've done, public servants all over Canada have done, is they've held up pictures of baby bottle tooth decay. Now, baby bottle tooth decay is caused by babies sucking on sugared water or fruit juice or even milk for hours on end. And you can tell it easily. You can tell the difference between wholesale rotting of teeth and baby bottle tooth decay. What baby bottle tooth decay is when the baby sucks on the bottle, the top teeth rot to the gum, but the bottom teeth are protected. So you see these mouths with horrible teeth on the top and perfect teeth on the bottom. That is baby bottle tooth decay. But they were holding these pictures up as if these were the pictures from fluoridated communities compared to non-fluoridated communities. Dishonest, intellectually dishonest, if they knew. But unfortunately, most of these people, these public servants, these medical officers of health, feel obliged to toe the party line. Health Canada says that fluoridation is safe and effective, and here are the tools you use to demonstrate that, including this photograph of baby bottle tooth decay, pretending that's what happens.
The governor of Utah is on record for saying, 44% of Utah is, I think, fluoridated or so basically half and half, right? And he's saying the dentists there are seeing no difference.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And then this is again and again. If you look at the history, More often than not, when people compare two cities, they say this city is fluoridated and their teeth are awful. This city is non-fluoridated, their teeth are awful. This teeth is fluoridated, teeth are perfect. When you look carefully at those two populations, you'll find a difference in income levels. Remember, this far stronger relationship between dental decay and the background of the children is level of income. They're from poor families. They're more likely to have tooth decay. That is a much stronger relationship than any whether or not you have fluoride in the water or not. But the government knows all this. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you, there's some other research that you've talked about over the years as well, Paul, about the link between fluoride and thyroid problems and fluoride and osteosarcoma. I'm wondering if maybe we can talk a little bit about some of that research.
Yes, you've got to look at two things. The fluoride's effect on, well, three things. Fluoride's effect on the brain is a big issue, and now the science is there to demonstrate it. Fluoride can lower thyroid function, and we know that because doctors in the 30s and the 40s in Argentina, Germany, France were giving people had hyperactivity, hyperthyroidism, overactive thyroid. They were giving them fluoride to lower the activity of the thyroid gland. And people at the time and since have said, well, if fluoride lowers the activity of someone with hyperthyroidism, what about the person with normal fluoride? Isn't it going to lower their thyroid activity and make them hypothyroid? So a long history that fluoride may be lowering the activity of the thyroid gland. And they've done studies now, modern studies. There was a study done in England by Stephen Peckham, which showed that there was a correlation between the incidence of hypothyroidism as measured by GPs in thousands of practices all over the UK, and whether or not there's fluoride in the water. And then there's a study by, I think it was Ashley Malin, published in 2018. Ashley Malin found, she didn't find, this is interesting, she didn't find there was a difference in TSH levels. That's the average TSH. That's a measure of hypothyroidism. If you have your hypothyroid, then you have lower levels of TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone. She didn't find that. I'm sorry, the TSH levels go up if you have hypothyroidism. So she didn't find a difference. However, if she looked at the subpopulation that was already outright iodine deficient or borderline iodine deficient, that's when you find the effect that fluoride exacerbates low iodine intake. So if you're already not getting enough iodine, you are susceptible to hypothyroidism, yes. But if you're subjected to low iodine and you're subjected to fluoride, then it's an even stronger relationship. You're more likely to get hypothyroidism. And then here's just an amazing, I didn't realize this. When the fetus comes into existence, it has no thyroid gland. The infant has no way of generating thyroid hormones. And thyroid hormones regulate development, growth and development. And so the fetus is absolutely dependent on the mother's thyroid status. If the mother is producing enough of the thyroid hormones, the baby's development will be normal, fine. But if the mother is hypothyroid, the baby will not get enough thyroid hormones, not making it itself, and not getting enough from the mother. So this may be the simplest explanation. The impact on the thyroid gland of women, of pregnant women, may be the cause of the lowering of IQ that we're seeing in Mexico City, Canada, and I think we'll see in other places as well.
There's a lot of other health effects with fluoride. Can you talk a little bit about the link between fluoride and osteosarcoma as well? I think that was a some Harvard research that came out about that as well.
Yeah, I've got to say this. as a the first opponents of fluoridation were biochemists, particularly biochemists in the state of Wisconsin, where there were dentists in the 1950s who were pushing fluoridation like maniacs. And the biochemists said, wait a moment, we've used fluoride in our experiments to inhibit enzymes. And these include 2 Nobel Prize winners, James Sumner at Cornell University, Nobel Prize for enzyme chemistry. He said we should be very careful, slow about rushing to fluoridate. He says fluoride poisons enzymes, and that's why people get sick. That's why people die. It's because their enzymes are poison. So I've got to say this, as a biochemist, now that's my main specialty is biochemistry. I was appalled when I started to read what fluoride could do to enzymes, G proteins, and all that. To put this in the drinking water was just crazy. Now, Pam, think about this. You're looking at why they're putting this fluoride in the drinking water and so on. You're thinking about, is this a good idea? Number one, they have never demonstrated that anything, any biochemistry, chemical function, molecule, anything that goes on biochemically in the body does not need fluoride. They haven't demonstrated that fluoride is needed for anything in the body. So all they're looking for is an interaction with the surface of the teeth. Nothing to do with biochemistry. It's not doing us any good to swallow this crap, okay? Number one. Number two, when you look at what it can do to the body, all kinds of things. There are many reviews of fluoride's biochemistry. But there's another clue. In 2012, Ron Breaker at Yale University, he showed that lower organisms like bacteria, fungi, some plants, have proteins or genes which code for proteins which pump fluoride out of their cells. So if you're a bacteria single cell, you've got this pump that you get fluoride inside the cell, it's pumping the fluoride out. And same with fungi and so on. So you see right from the beginning of evolution, nature knows keep this fluoride away from the inside of the cell. Keep it away from nature's biochemistry. And then if you go all the way up to human beings, what do you find? First of all, we find kidneys which pump at least 50% of the fluoride each day out of our bodies. So we've got that protection. And we look at babies, breast milk. If you look at breast milk, the levels of fluoride in breast milk are extremely low. So the mother is protecting the newborn baby from fluoride if the baby drinks breast milk. But if the baby is given formula and it's made up with fluoridated tap water, that baby's going to get at least 100 times more fluoride than nature intended. But now, okay, so that's the good news. The infant is protected from fluoride if you breastfeed. The bad news is the fetus is not protected by the placenta. The fluoride gets through the placenta, and from day one, the baby's developing tissues, which includes the brain, is exposed to fluoride. And as far as the brain is concerned, the blood-brain barrier is not formed completely until about 6 months of infancy. So the baby's brain is not being protected. Now, I ask you, what public health servant, if they hear this information with an open mind, is going to sanction putting fluoride into the water, knowing the first day of existence, the fetus's brain is going to be exposed to this very damaging biochemical interferer, this fluoride ion, which interferes with biochemistry. And that this then has the potential of lowering the IQ, and doing God knows what else to the body. And now we have the science coming through, which shows the effect. I mean, I was saying these kind of things, you know this, years ago, before any of these major IQ studies had actually been published. But how many, I really hope you can send this recording to Health Canada, because I want each of those servants at Health Canada who have been involved in and continue to promote fluoridation, continue to select panels to rubber stamp this practice and say it's safe and effective. They've done this even after these major IQ studies have been published. They've done this. And even after the National Toxicology Program produced their review, they're still saying it's safe and effective, and they're getting their experts to rubber stamp this practice.
I really don't know how they can sleep at night, Paul.
I don't know.
They have the information.
Look, when a PhD MD from Harvard, who is the Surgeon General of Fluoride, looked at the same information that you should have looked at, should have read and absorbed and studied, said, this is appalling. Fluoridation amounts to malpractice. And then, well, what is the result? And I think if I was in their shoes and I had an ethical compass, I would say, if you're not going to change this policy, bosses, Director of Health Canada, if you're not going to change this, I'm out of here. I am not going to be part of poisoning our children, limiting the future of our children by damaging their brains.
It's a crazy practice. Can you explain to people, because a lot of people don't know this, what is fluoride? What is it that they're adding to the water? It's not sodium fluoride.
Well, first we've got to put my chemist hat on now. Thank you very much. Ex-professional chemistry. Okay. First of all, we've got to admit that the fluoride ion is not fluorine atom. The fluorine atom is the most reactive chemical species we've ever met. It attacks everything. But by the time the fluorine atom has got an extra electron, which makes it the fluoride ion, F minus, meaning it's an atom with an extra electron, it's an atom with a negative charge, many chemists looked at that and said, well, I can understand that fluorine is horrible. We wouldn't want to put fluorine in the drinking water. No way. But fluoride, hey, that's like comparing chloride, sodium chloride, which is salt, with chlorine gas, which is a poisonous gas, a very strong oxidizing agent used in World War I. They're different. It's chalk and cheese. And this is where I was in 1996, and so I started reading the literature. I thought, fluorine bad, but fluoride okay. Like salt, no problem. But it turns out that whilst fluoride is not reactive chemically, not very reactive chemically, it does certain things which makes it extremely active biologically. It interferes with hydrogen bonds, it complexes with metal ions, which are at the center of many important enzymatic reactions and so on. I could go on forever, but people don't want that. Okay, now what you're getting at is they say, well, we're only adding a mineral to the drinking water. Baloney, it's not a mineral. They're not adding fluorspar. They're not adding cryolite. They're not adding a mineral to the drinking water. No, they're adding a byproduct of the phosphate fertilizer industry. Let me explain that. The phosphate fertilizer industry essentially takes an insoluble phosphate rock. It's not a very good fertilizer, phosphate rock, because it's insoluble in water. So they treat it with concentrated sulfuric acid to make the phosphate soluble, phosphoric acid or sodium phosphate, etc. So now this superphosphate is soluble phosphate. But in the process of doing that, it liberates when you treat phosphate rock with concentrated sulfuric acid, it produces two horribly toxic byproducts. Hydrogen fluoride, which is one of the most toxic substances known, and silicon tetrafluoride. And for years, these substances decimated the crops around the phosphate mines in Florida and Louisiana, decimated the crops, crippled the cattle, etc., until at some point they said you have to remove those poisonous gases. They used a spray of water, scrubbing towers. And this water converts the hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride into a new substance called hexafluorosilicic acid, H2SiF6. And it's that scrubbing liquor, essentially untreated, a solution of hexafluorosilicic acid, which is the agent most commonly used in fluoridating the public drinking water. It's a very cheap way of getting rid of hazardous waste. And
They
it's
turned
quite
it into
legal.
a value-added product by using us as waste disposals, correct?
Absolutely. And it's come, once again, it's a development, a bad development from a good intention. The good intention of the law, Resource Conservation Recovery Act, was to encourage industry to recycle its toxic byproducts. You want one industry to use another industry's chemical rather than putting it into the environment. So they encouraged industry to reuse these toxic byproducts. And that's what they call it. Once an industry recycles a toxic byproduct, it's no longer comes under the regulations of RCRA, RCRA, Resource Conservation Recovery. It becomes a product. And once it's a product, you can sell it. It doesn't have any longer all the things you have to do when you're handling or discarding a hazardous waste. All those are dropped.
It contains things
So
like
that's
lead,
how
arsenic, mercury. It has a lot of toxins within it,
there's a
right?
whole bunch of crap in there, including radioactive isotopes. Because when my son and I went to visit the phosphate mines and the chemical processing plants in Polk County, Florida, we were at one of these plants, and there's a sign. It says, agricultural chemicals this way, uranium this way. So they actually mine that ore to extract uranium. But as a result, you've got the radioactive decay products for very small amounts. And we're not talking 100 weights, or we're talking minute amounts. But minute amounts of radioactive materials are not something you want to put in the drinking water.
No. But NSF 60, right, they're supposed to be regulating anything that's added to our city water. And they really haven't done any of their due diligence in adding this junk, this toxin to our city water. Nobody's found anything showing that it's safe.
No. Michael Connett, my son, who was the lawyer who did this brilliant act of winning our lawsuit, the judge's ruling to September 2024, he did. The beauty of doing a lawsuit is always you get to depose the other side. So he called in everybody, including the group that you're talking about.
The NSF 60?
Yeah, NSF people, the National Sanitation Foundation. He called them in. He called in the CDC. He called in the FDA, and he got the heads of all these agencies. And he said to them, "What studies have you seen or reviewed which give you a safe level of fluoride as far as neurotoxicity is concerned?" And all these people are absolutely struck dumb. They just stared at the cameras. He caught them with none of them had any idea at all that fluoride might be neurotoxic, and certainly no idea of the literature. And so that there they are. They're going ahead having no notion at all that fluoride is neurotoxic, and no notion of any safeguard in terms of, oh, well, the government has done these IQ tests or something, and they showed it's perfectly harmless. No, they've got nothing, nada. They just continue like a bunch.
But they put this drug in the water, and they're supposed to monitor it, right? They're supposed to regulate it. They just put it in the water, and they don't do any due diligence beyond that. And the due diligence wasn't done beforehand either. But
No,
you think if it's a drug and they're using it as a drug, they should be monitoring it.
They're a bunch of clockwork toys. They're wound up by the regulatory authorities and the Dental Association, and they're put out there to brainwash the public. And they've done a darn good job, along with the major news media in Canada, the United States, and England. Right now, I'm in the process of writing a letter to the Director General of the BBC saying, I've always grown up trusting the BBC, but your coverage of fluoridation, particularly these last few years of the IQ studies, has been absolutely unprofessional, shoddy. You're not doing your job. And that's just true of the major media. There is this kind of assumption in the media. If we are supporting government public health policy, we're safe. We're safe. We're safe. We can hide behind statements of Health Canada. We can hide behind statements from the CDC. We don't actually have to worry about reading the literature for ourselves or even covering major developments when they occur, which shows that fluoride lowers IQ, etc., etc., or when the NTP review comes out, or when the lawsuit, although there was pretty good coverage around the world when it got to the point of the lawsuit. But they feel protected by ignorance. If we don't know, ignorance is bliss. If we don't know, if we're lazy and unprofessional, we're safe, which is the last thing they should feel, right? If you're lazy and you're unprofessional, you should feel pretty insecure.
Vulnerable.
You wouldn't feel secure if you didn't know something about the background of this issue. Talking to me.
No, a lot of what happened with fluoridation when they started fluoridating our water supply is the sugar industry was looking for kind of a scapegoat to the increase in cavities that were happening because people were increasing their consumption of sugar. And so that was a little cozy relationship as well between the sugar industry and artificial water fluoridation.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. This has been documented very well by Chris Neurath from the Fluoride Action Network, has written a wonderful article about the sugar lobby and how the fluoride lobby is using the same playbook. Yes, in 1949, 1 year before the U.S. Public Health Service endorsed water fluoridation, they said, we need to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. And voila! 1 year later, the US government comes back and says, this is how you can do it. You can put fluoride in the drinking water and kids can eat as much chocolate and candy and cookies as you like. And that they have been there. Still, the Confectionery Association endorses water fluoridation. They are still there today supporting the fluoridation, the pro-fluoridation movement. Outrageous.
Yeah. It's crazy. Now, what else is happening? You're writing a letter to the BBC. I know there's a lot of very, very powerful fluoride activists working in Canada and the United States to educate people and to converse with the politicians. What's happening with Michael's case and any appeals that might be coming across the board? Do you think that the EPA will appeal that decision?
The EPA has put in a formal appeal of the result that was anticipated. How far that will get with the Trump administration, I do not know. But we're certainly prepared to do battle again with the EPA. As far as we're aware, there's no new science which will let them off the hook. So just wasting more taxpayers' money if they do that. But as far as me is concerned, I absolutely hate this issue, Pam. I hate it. I only get a little joy when I see people like yourself, who have integrity and have done their best for years and years to get the truth out on the media, whereas very few other people are doing that. But I just find this whole continued promotion of fluoridation by the dental lobby and the government health agencies like Health Canada, the New Zealand Medical Association, Australian Medical Association, the British Dental Association, the American Dental Association. It's sickening. It's sickening. You know, they have allowed a wedge to be driven between honest science, and public health policy. And that is very dangerous. It is very, very dangerous. You're inviting every conspiracy theorist in the world to come in and fill that vacuum. If the government doesn't support honest science, then we're all threatened by crap. And there's no simple way of saying it. If the government does not support honest science, you're opening it up to every charlatan in the world to sell everything they want to sell to make a lot of money. So the government has to stand up for honest science and promote honest science. And the moment a government official lies, they should be sacked, period. That's how serious it is. So having to read the crap that the American Dental Association is putting out to try to dismiss these IQ studies, these government-funded IQ studies, this 7-year government review by the National Toxicology Program, it makes me sick. And to have the media silent about this makes me even sicker. I have lost my rudder. There's got to be a place where honest science rules. And the good news is we found 2 places where honest science rules. We found the National Toxicology Program, independent scientists reviewed the literature that we gave them and more, and came back and vindicated our position. Honest science ruled there. And then we found a judge, a federal law judge, also looked at both sides and with integrity ruled in our favor. These are 2 places where I was hoping that the rudder in my life would come back. Science for me is where you go when things get really controversial. I can't. Politics is sickening. I hate politics. I hate it. I hate what goes on. I hate the divisiveness in the United States. I hate this horribly stupid thing that Trump is doing with Canada. I hate all this. The war. I hate millions of people being killed by bombs in the Middle East. I hate all this stuff. So the one place I gravitate, well, actually 2 places. 2 places. One place is science, where you can't argue you can't tell an atom what to do. The atom does what it's doing, and you study it and you say yes or no. It's a place where honesty prevails. Without honesty, you don't have science. Okay, so that has been my rudder, relying on science to come up with judgments. Where the issue is technical. Where it's not technical, then, I've got no rudder for that. Only common sense. But the other place I go to is music. I just find music, classical music, so all these rules and history, and a wonderful history, and a beautiful experience. The bloody propagandists, the PR people, they can't change that. So I have music and I have science. But
Yep.
I don't have public health.
Listen, when I look at some of the bottom line around some of this, the average citizen maybe doesn't understand the science. But there's some issues in and around fluoride that are very basic and very simple to understand for the average taxpayer. And the waste,
Yeah.
let's set aside the toxicity, the waste behind adding this substance to our water supply is astronomical. I think we only consume about 1% of the water from our city sources, right? The rest of it is used to water our lawns or clean our dishes or our clothes. Only 1% we are ingesting.
Yeah.
And the cost associated with that is astronomical. And there are better ways. If people want to seek out better ways to get fluoridation, there are better, cheaper, more effective, and safer ways to do it. And that is, brushing your teeth and spitting it out, for example, right?
But even worse, that is a violation of common sense right there, and a very simple issue to understand. You're getting rid of a hazardous waste product. It's a very wasteful because very little of it reaches the target it's meant to. But even worse than that, which people can understand, you shouldn't use the drinking water to deliver medication to people. Why shouldn't you do that? One, if you put the medicine in the water, you can't control the dose. Number one, bad medicine. Number two, you can't control the dose that everybody gets. People drink different amounts of water. And it goes to people that have deficiencies, the people that are sick, people that have nutrient deficiencies.
Kidneys, yeah.
And lastly, you shouldn't put it in the drinking water because you're forcing medication on people without their informed consent. And it's amazing now. Now, let me just focus on. You put fluoride in the water, you are practicing medicine without informed consent of the recipients. And Health Canada should be ashamed of themselves because they are doing to every citizen in Canada, want to do to every citizen in Canada what no single doctor in Canada can do to any single patient. Force them to take a medicine. Force them to take a medicine. You can imagine. Here, I put some fluoride in the drink in the water. Here we are. There's the patient. I put the fluoride in the water. I say, now, I'm your doctor. Drink this. And you say, I don't want to drink it, doctor. I'm telling you, you have to drink that. I'm your doctor. I'm telling you, you have to drink it. That patient does not have to drink that. And if he does or she does,
as you often say, Paul, as you often say, a doctor has to know the background of each patient
Yes.
individually. And if they just randomly hand out a medication without doing a full history of their patient, I mean, they would lose their license. And yet Health Canada, who is allowing this practice to take place, they don't know every single person's history or how many other sources of fluoride they're getting or taking in. I mean, it's pure negligence.
It is indeed. In fact, the person that was the best on the whole the unethical aspect of fluoridation was James Beck from Calgary, who was the co-author of our book. It was myself, James Beck, who sadly has dementia right now, and Spedding Micklem, who even sadder has passed away. It was I love Spedding. He was a great pianist amongst everything, great man. So I'm the only one left standing, if you like. But James Beck, MD, PhD from Calgary, he was red hot on the ethical issue. And in addition to what you've just added about not knowing the patient's background, the other thing is that nobody's monitoring. A doctor monitors the effect. You give a patient some medication and they come back to you and you say, well, how are you getting on with the medicine? They are monitored. There's no monitoring of people that are drinking fluoridated water.
But wouldn't Health Canada be monitoring every pharmaceutical drug that is approved here in this country?
And Health Canada hardly financed any health study of the population of Canada that was drinking fluoridated water. They've always looked to the United States or other countries to provide the evidence. It's good to know that Canadian researchers have come up very well on the IQ studies. Christine Till, Bruce Lanphier from Vancouver, Christine Till from York University in Toronto, Ashley Malin, some really good Canadian researchers are doing the work, but for little help from Health Canada. Although Health Canada did actually contribute financially to the Green study of 2019, which is good. There's one more study. By the way, you've asked me several times about other effects. Quite frankly, keep it simple. Keep it simple. If fluoride damages the brain, I don't give a tinker's cuss what it does to your toenails or to your hip or anything else. If it damages the developing brain, you should not need any more evidence at all. Unless you are one of those people that think the child's teeth are more important than their brain, then there's some dentists who really do. They are so obsessed with the teeth that they think it's more important, the most important tissue in the body, certainly one that gives them the most money for their efforts. But I think the rest of us think that the developing brain is far more important to protect that. And that's assuming that the other outside of the argument that fluoride actually reduces tooth decay is actually working, as you pointed out before. The mechanism is topical. So there are lots of randomized controlled trials which have demonstrated that brushing with fluoridated toothpaste lowers tooth decay. I think it was about 70 or something. But there's no randomized controlled trial that's ever been done which has demonstrated that swallowing fluoride lowers tooth decay. So, you got it on both fronts. The evidence that fluoride damages the brain, scientific evidence, is far, far stronger and more solid than the scientific evidence that swallowing fluoridated water reduces tooth decay. You can take that to the bank.
I think we should probably end it on that note, Paul, unless there's anything else you want to add before we sign off here.
No, it's just so nice to see you again, Pam, and brings back many memories. Staying with you, meeting your family, being on Andy's radio show. Is Andy still with us?
That station was shut down, and so, but I did archive our old interviews, and so I should release those as well because those were the good old days. That was about 15 years ago, I think, Paul.
Is Andy still alive?
I think so. Yeah, he's basically retired. I've tried to reach out to him, but haven't heard back. So I think he's just enjoying retirement.
Well, if you do find him, do say a big thank you from me. I was very impressed that there was one broadcaster in Canada that was prepared to tell the truth on this and get upset about it and interview a lot of people about it. And unfortunately, like many of us, we were just hitting our head against a brick wall. You know, if you try to fight fluoridation, you can see the little holes come in your head and you see the gray matter oozing out where you keep hitting the brick wall of bureaucratic.
It's a frustrating subject.
Yeah.
But yeah, Andy was great. We almost got it out of our water 15 years ago, thanks to him and thanks to your visiting London and the great work that you did. But our public health officials are so brainwashed and they just toe the party line. It was just so sad to watch these quote unquote experts basically sell their souls to the devil. It's crazy. And the evidence is just so clear.
You know, it's very sad. I spent a lot of time in Canada. I went to 7 provinces, in fact, in Canada, fighting incineration. And with incineration, I found that when the public mobilized, the politicians listened, and they didn't allow many incinerators to be built in Canada, very few. Whereas in the United States, at that time, we were building dozens of the damn thing. But I haven't seen the same ability to mobilize the public against fluoridation. And it goes back to the beginning of this conversation, where you have the wholesale complicity of Health Canada and the medical officers of health as a phalanx protecting local politicians from the wisdom of the people.
They just have to turn off the tap. I mean, this liquid shows up at our city water supply and it's got a skull and crossbone on the side of the container, and they add it into our city water not knowing anything about the outcome of this very toxic substance. It's just a simple act of turning off the tap.
Absolutely. There are many, many toxic issues confronting our population locally and internationally, PFAs and so on, all kinds of toxic issues. But this is the only issue of this magnitude, which is as easy to end as turning off a tap, turning off the spigot at the public. All you have to do is to turn the tap off. The issue is essentially over. And I wish that was the same for PFAs and dioxins and things like that, but it's going to be years and years and years before we cleaned up the planet of dioxins and PFAs and all the other toxic substances we put out there. But this one, we could turn off the tap if you have the political will.
Yes, yeah, they have to have the open brains to do it. Unfortunately, we haven't seen too much of that. But thank goodness for what's happening in Utah and Florida, and there's many other communities that are considering stopping fluoridation. And so hopefully we'll see the tide turn. And it's going to be thanks to your son and his work with the legal case, and many, many thanks to you, Paul, for all of your years of dedication on this subject. You've just given so much to the cause, so I can't thank you enough.
Well, it's a two-way process. It's a two-way process. Activists like myself are sustained by activists like yourself. The scientific activists are sustained by people like yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for joining me today on my podcast, Truth Over Spin. For more information about the work that I do in the area of circadian biology, please visit my website, www.pamkilleen.com. And to view or listen to more of my podcasts, you can find me at many other platforms, including Apple, YouTube, and Rumble. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll look forward to seeing you again. The information in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. We are not licensed healthcare providers and our content is not a substitute for professional medical diagnosis, advice, or treatment. For personalized health guidance, or if you have specific medical concerns, please consult a qualified medical professional. They can assess your individual health needs and offer recommendations tailored to you. By listening to this podcast, you agree to this disclaimer. We assume no responsibility or liability for actions taken based on the information provided here.